Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Melanie, and I'm going to be your host and your coach today. We're going to give it maybe another 2 minutes or so just to let everybody join the call. So just hold on tight and we'll get started soon. All right, everyone, we're going to give it one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for your patience. Hi, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Melanie Espelond, and I'm going to be your coach and your host for today's event on acing the CBS MBA interview. And before we get started, just wanted to let you know that you are welcome to put questions in the chat. However, I will wait to answer questions in the chat until we are at the Q&A section after I go through some prepared content. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So today what we'll be covering are the top tips for the CBS interview, and then we'll go into a Q&A at the end. And I'd like to take a moment just to introduce myself to you. So my name is Melanie. I am a Leland coach and also a professional executive coach. I'm also an ex-McKinsey consultant, and I myself have been through the MBA process. I was a Columbia Business School student, and today I am one of their alumni interviewers. So I know all about how they think about how they want to bring in the right people into the program, what the culture looks like, and what really makes it a good fit for you, and how to really show up in that interview. The other thing I'd like to call out here is we've got a nice QR code and a discount code to work with me where you can get 25% off of your first service. So let's go ahead and dive right in now that you know a little bit more about me and why I'm the right person to talk to you about Columbia Business School. And as we start to talk about this, really everything I'm talking about today is Columbia specific, but these are also just great tips in general for any top MBA program in order for you to just think about how do you want to show up well in the interview. Interestingly, I found that a lot of clients in the past sometimes kind of brush aside the interview or they think, oh, well, I made it to the interview stage. I don't have to worry now. But really, there's no reason not to put in as much effort into the interview process as you did into your entire application and your essays. The way I like to think about it is there's really no reason for you to not do really well in the interview. You just have to make sure that you've prepared. So, to get started, before we jump into specific Columbia themes, I want to talk about their interview format because it is a little different than some other top schools. The location is always going to be virtual. They are no longer doing in-person interviews. And additionally, you're going to have an interview that's about 30 to 40 minutes in length. It will be in English. It doesn't matter if you don't live in the United States, it will have to be in English. This is a requirement in order to test your English speaking abilities. And then in terms of who's actually doing the interview, there's actually three totally different groups of people who might be interviewing you. It could be someone like myself who is a alumni ambassador. It could be a second year student who has gone through training the same as I have, or it could be an admissions officer. So it's three different groups of people. And so that's kind of an interesting fact here, where it will change a little bit how the interview feels, depending upon which person you end up being paired with. You actually won't know who you're interviewing with until 48 hours before the interview. The way it works is Columbia will give you basically a schedule where there's different slots that you can sign up for, but it'll be blind. You won't know who your interviewer is until you've picked that spot and until it's only 48 hours before the interview. Basically, at that time, you will get the name of your interviewer and you'll be able to communicate directly with them. And what you'll want to do at that point is basically send them an email, ask them how they would like to proceed. They probably have some sort of a Zoom or Microsoft Teams URL that they prefer to use. And I would also recommend giving them your resume. This is just helpful context for them so that they have a little more information about you before the interview. And this interview is blind. So you want to make sure they have that resume because they have not seen anything else. They have not read your application, even if they're an admissions officer. They have not yet seen any other materials on you so that everybody has basically the same kind of blind experience where they're going in with very little information. So overall, don't worry about which group is the person interviewing you. Of course, if it's an alum like myself or second year student, it'll probably be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed because that person is maybe closer in age to you. However, if it is an admissions officer, do not worry. They are just as excited to get to know you. Now I want to talk about some specific themes about what Columbia is looking for in this interview process. And again, this will be a little bit different depending upon which school you're applying to. So this is Columbia specific, but this type of information can give you a sense of also how to show up really well in an interview at a different school. So let's talk about the first theme, which is why do you want an MBA and why a Columbia MBA? This seems obvious, but a lot of people, I think, really don't prepare as well for this question as they really could. You really want to be super specific. And the thought process behind this is that CBS is very strict about wanting to know that you're serious about their school. They want to know that you're not just applying because it's a top school or an M7, but that you truly are interested in Columbia. Additionally, they want to know that it's a two-way fit where you're a fit for Columbia and they're also a fit for you. So you want to be showing that balance of how the two of you fit together. And the other way to think about this is Columbia has already shown you through their application that this is important to them because of essay number 3. Essay number 3 asks about how you would co-create your Columbia experience. In other words, they talk about this two-way fit. So the good news is you've already done some of this work prepping for this this interview theme through having written essay number 3. Now, a couple of ideas for you in terms of how to answer this question really well. One thing I think that's important to mention is New York. Columbia knows it is the only M7 top school in New York City, which is why this is so important to talk about. They even have the tagline at the very center of business as part of how Columbia sells itself. It also talks about access and how it's so easy to work with business professionals in various industries because you're in New York City. So, talking about New York and how that's going to be helpful to you is really useful. You can do this both professionally as well as personally. In terms of personally, maybe New York's a great fit for you because of friends and family that are there, or because you love the culture or various aspects of the lifestyle of living there. So, think about how Columbia fits into why a CBS MBA is the right fit for you. And then additionally, we want you to be really, again, specific about why Columbia is a good fit versus why any good MBA program would be a fit. And that's why I've written here below the bad example answer. So, upon first view, this answer could actually sound really strong. It's articulated well, it seems smart, they mention specific things about the school, but it's just not quite CBS enough. So let me walk you through this. This person talks about, firstly, I plan to improve my executive presence by taking classes such as lead, people, teams, and organizations. And they talk about, secondly, I will prepare for my future C suite role by leaning into the core curriculum with my classmates. I'm excited to take corporate finance and marketing. And at the end of the day, what I don't love about this answer is that these are the types of things that basically any top business program is going to have. They're going to have a leadership class, they're going to have corporate finance and marketing and some sort of core curriculum. So I don't love this answer because this person could get these things at any other top school. Additionally, when we look at the third thing this person says is, thirdly, I will build my future network by joining the investment banking club to cultivate job opportunities and the tennis club to bond with my classmates. Again, pretty much any top program is going to have some sort of investment banking or finance club. And a lot of schools will have a tennis club or some sort of other sports club. Where this could get a lot smarter is, what are the specific things that Columbia offers that other schools don't have? So, for example, if you want to go into investment banking, you have New York City right there at your disposal. That's actually really huge, where it would be a huge help for you to be in the city and be able to talk to professionals one on one after class. There's also a lot of individuals who are practitioners at the school who have worked in investment banks. So you could talk about that. Additionally, here, the tennis club. Well, that's great that you want to bond with other students, but what do you want to do at that club? Is there some sort of an event you want to throw? Do you want to go see different types of tennis games together? There is I believe there's a tennis arena in Queens in New York. There's ways to be more specific again about how you're co-creating this experience. So one other thing to mention here before I move on to the next theme, because this is so important, is just think about what makes Columbia unique. There's a lot of different things beyond just being in New York City. They have a family business curriculum, luxury retail and fashion. They have a real estate program, value investing, a great entrepreneurship program and resources. So again, get into the nitty gritty of why CBS and how is it different from another top MBA program. So hopefully those are a lot of really specific details to give you a sense of how do you make a better case for why CBS. So now let's talk about the second theme that Columbia is looking for, which is professional promise. So again, similar to the first theme, the Columbia application gave you a really good insight into the fact that this is important to them. And it was through different questions that they asked you in the application. Overall, by professional promise, what the school is referring to is they want to understand what your specific plan is. Not only what is your immediate post MBA goal, your 3 to 5 year milestone, and your long term dream job, as they call it, but they also want to know how every single step makes sense. What is the plan? They want it to be pretty specific and to know that you have really thought this through and that you actually have professional promise to get there, right? You are ambitious, but also realistic. They actually believe that you have a good plan and that you're going to be successful in the future. So you want to really make sure that before you go into your interview, you have looked back at your essays and all of these different questions that Columbia already does ask you about your goals, and that you're super clear about how every single step makes sense. So, for example, if you're applying for August entry, which means that you're going to have a summer internship, how does the summer internship help you get the full time role right out of school? How does that help you get to your 3 to 5 year goal? And then how does that help you get to your long term dream job? So, you want to be really thoughtful about how each step builds upon each other. Now, a few other things here to mention. I have here something called Plan B. Plan B is something that can come up in your Columbia interview that sometimes throws people off where they may not be ready for this. This is basically further testing if you have really thought through your professional promise or your plan. What is your roadmap? So you want to be ready to answer questions about your plan B if something doesn't work out. So, for example, if you don't get into Columbia or business school, what's your plan B? What will you do? If you don't get the summer internship you're looking for, what's your plan B, etc. Now, the way to answer this is important. If the school is going to ask you about, well, what do you do if you don't get into Columbia or if you don't get into business school? What's your plan B? A great way to answer this is to talk about how you might continue to work on building your professional skills or filling your skill gaps that you need to get to your longer term goals and then reapply to school next year. That's a great way to answer that question where you're still being thoughtful and saying, well, this is how I'm going to make myself an even better candidate for my longer term goals, but I still want to reapply to business school. I think the worst thing you could say here is that you wouldn't reapply to business school. And then in terms of if you don't get the right summer internship or you don't get that job that you're looking for right out of business school, being thoughtful about, well, what could be an adjacent role or an adjacent company or something that would be similar that could still help you to get whatever networks or experiences or skills that you need to get to those mid and long term goals. So there's various ways to think about it. So just make sure you prep this in particular for the Columbia interview. Now, moving on to theme number 3, which is teamwork. So, for this one, this is pretty much something that any top business school is going to be looking for is how do you work in a team? Are you going to be someone who is inclusive? In particular, for Columbia, inclusivity in DEI remains really important. Their essay number 2 is all about how you've created a more inclusive environment or how you've used inclusive leadership skills. So, again, the application is already showing you what Columbia is going to be looking for in this interview process. So, overall, teamwork for them is how are you working with others? Do you even enjoy being in a team? Are you inclusive? Are you going to make other people comfortable? Are you self aware enough to make others feel included? And really, what's kind of your overall leadership style? How are you going to be showing up on campus? Additionally, here you want to be aware of the Columbia system and how it is collaborative. So that's going to include things like clusters during your core curriculum. The cluster is a group of about 70 to 80 of your classmates that you take all of your core classes with. So that helps to make such a huge program of like 900 students feel a lot more intimate and smaller. And then in addition to the cluster, you have a learning team, which is about 5 or so people from within your cluster. And you tend to do a lot of homework and projects together during your core curriculum. So these are some things just to be aware of, right? Where you can talk to this collaborative nature and these specific types of things that Columbia is offering. So definitely go in knowing what is a cluster and what is a learning team. Now, in order for them to establish if you're a good team player or if you're inclusive, usually they'll ask you behavioral questions. These might be pulled from the resume that you share with your interviewer. So definitely be prepared for something on your resume to come up where they might say, oh, I see you led a team of 5 on XYZ project. Tell me about that. So definitely be prepared for something to be pulled from the resume. Additionally, they have not read your essays. So you can use something from your essays, such as essay number 2 from your application, if it ends up being relevant for an interview question. Again, this interviewer has not yet read that essay and will not through the process. Some of the questions to be aware of could be something like, tell me about a time you made an environment more equitable or inclusive. Tell me about a time you brought a dysfunctional team together. How would you describe your leadership style? These are the types of questions to be prepared for when it comes to teamwork. So, overall, this is a category that a lot of schools really are looking for. But I know for sure Columbia is interested in teamwork and, in particular, your ability to be inclusive. So, definitely make sure that you have at least a few a few stories ready to go for these types of behavioral questions. Now, the last theme that I want to talk about is contribution and engagement. So, this is again something that a lot of top business schools are going to look for. So, it's not just Columbia specific, but it really is something that is important to them. And we want to make sure that we're really thinking about how have you shown contribution engagement in the past and how will you do it at Columbia? So this is building upon what we talked about earlier in theme one, which was that two-way fit with the program. Are you a fit for Columbia? Are they a fit for you? And are you going to be engaged with the community? Are you going to be contributing? How are you co-creating with this school? So you want to think about this in two different ways. First is how can you have data points or proof points of contribution and engagement from the past? You probably have these already if you already got an interview. So think about it. Think about how am I showing contribution and engagement? What are the extracurricular activities that I'm involved in? Is it sports or music or employee resource groups or recruiting at work or some sort of a hobby? How are you involved in your community? How have you shown that both in undergrad as well as post undergrad? So we want to have at least one or two strong examples from both undergrad and post undergrad if they ask you about these data points or illustrations of contribution. Now, the next part is how will you then contribute to Columbia? What is that going to look like? So this is really diving into how are you a fit for this school? And this is where I think sometimes people don't go far enough in their thinking. I think that a lot of people can say, oh, well, I'm going to join the tennis club, or I'm going to help plan the retail luxury goods conference. Well, that's great, but tell me more, right? Anybody can join a club once you get into the school, but how are you going to specifically contribute? What makes your contribution unique? How is it going to be leaving the community stronger than it was in the past, right? So this is really important to think about in depth. So where you could be stronger here is instead of saying something like, well, I plan on becoming an officer of the retail luxury goods club. Okay, give me more, right? I want to be the VP of conference, so be more specific, the VP of conference for the Luxury Goods Club. And this is because I'm really interested in creating a panel for the annual conference that looks at how luxury and tech are starting to change something. I'm thinking out loud here, but you could talk about specifically how your networks or your interests or skills or experiences are going to be useful to this community. So maybe you're someone that has a tech and fashion background. And so you can bring in people from your network to do a really interesting panel on those two areas or how tech and fashion are changing. So that's a really specific example, but that's the point, right? The point is to be really specific. The more specific and detailed you are, the more believable your contribution is going to sound and the more unique it's going to be. I'm going to remember that so much better as an interviewer than someone that just says, oh, yeah, I want to join all these clubs. Right? Again, really, how do you want to contribute to the community? How will it be different than before you got there? How's the school going to benefit? How are your classmates going to benefit from you being a part of their time in this community? So overall, that brings us to an opportunity to answer some Q&A. Wanted to just reiterate for you again, this is all based upon my experience of being a Columbia student, of having gone through the process myself, of being an alumni interviewer, and really understanding very clearly the culture of the school, as well as specifically what they are looking for. So at this point in time, what I want to do is let all of you ask whatever questions you have. And I just wanted to show on my screen again an opportunity for you to utilize a discount to work with me. So feel free to use this discount. It's Melanie E 25 all. And we also have a nifty QR code for you to be able to reach out to me. So I'm going to go ahead and see if anybody has questions. I am pulling up the chat and it looks like there were some questions here. So let me just take a quick look at the chat. Okay. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to come off of mute or to go ahead and put them in the chat. Any question is open. Let's see. So we've got one question here. Trevor, what are some of the logistics about the CBS interview process? All right, Trevor, thank you for your question. I'm actually going to go back a few slides, Trevor, and I'm going to show you a slide that gives you some information on these logistics. So this will help you out, Trevor. Um, what I think is most important to talk about in terms of the CBS interview format and logistics is that you could be interviewed by one of three different groups of people: an alum like myself, a second year student who's also been trained like me, and then thirdly, an admissions officer. So do not be alarmed if it's an admissions officer versus a second year student. Everybody is going to get the same treatment, the same type of interview, but I've noticed that can sometimes make folks nervous when they don't know who's going to interview them. You will pick a time slot blindly, and then 48 hours before your interview, you will receive the name of your interviewer. And at that time, you'll be able to Google them and find out a little bit more about them. At that point in time, also, it's very important. I want to reiterate: email your interviewer, introduce yourself, give them your resume, and ask them for their preferred way of doing the interview, which is probably their Zoom link. So hopefully that helps to answer your question on some of the logistics of the process. So let's see, we have one more question from Sophie. In addition to learning teams' unique courses and the New York City location, is there anything else we should definitely be aware of when trying to demonstrate why CBS is the best fit for us? So that's a great question. So there's a lot of different reasons why it would be a great school for you, right? So let's think back to CBS Essay 3, which is all about co-creating a great experience. And they actually ask in this essay question about culturally, academically, and professionally why it's a great fit for you. So it's actually a really great way for you to start thinking about answering why is CBS a good fit in the interview. You can think about those three categories. So if I think about professional reasons why Columbia is a great fit, it could be the New York City location. It could be in semester interviews, which is really groovy. A lot of schools, you can't really do that because of the location or attendance standards, but it's really flexible to do that at Columbia. It could be in-house professors that are also individuals that are practitioners who actually work in industry. It could be access to industry. It could be entrepreneurs in residence. It could be conferences, clubs. There's a lot of different professional reasons, right? And then in terms of academic, of course, there's very unique types of courses that Columbia offers, such as family business or real estate or value investing. And lastly, I would say for culture, the culture of the school is very much about DEI, inclusivity. It's very much a school of kind of like learning by doing, access, things of that nature. Culturally, also, again, I would say New York comes up, and that's a big part of the experience of living in New York City. I know that a great way to talk about why it's a good school is also, lastly, kind of a fourth category I'm adding, which is your personal connection. New York City is a very specific type of lifestyle. So for me, I remember when I applied, I talked about how I was already a New Yorker at the time, but I loved being able to go to art museums such as the MoMA or the Met. And that was a way of me relaxing and getting inspired. And I talked about wanting to share that inspiration with my classmates and use it as a way for us to relax and become re inspired and fulfilled after having a busy day of class and recruiting. So that's kind of a nifty little fourth way of thinking about why CBS would be a good fit. If anybody has specific questions about, hey, here's my situation, I don't really know how to make the argument for CBS, always happy to talk through that as well. So thank you for that question. Great question. Looks like we have another one here from Tanya. So, how would you recommend practicing prepping for interviews? I've noticed in the past when I try to memorize, I can stumble on words and it is not as effective. Okay, great question, Tanya. So, again, this goes back to one of my points, which was a lot of clients I've seen in the past, sometimes they don't take the interview seriously. Take it seriously. Not everybody gets in because they got an interview. There's still a good percent of people who will not get in. There's no reason not to get a great grade on your interview, right? You've just got to be prepared like any other part of the application. So make sure you are doing mock interviews, whether it's a friend or someone like myself or a coach on Leland. Make sure you're doing a mock interview. In terms of how to not kind of stumble over your words, Tanya, I would say that it's important that you don't prepare to the point of being scripted. So when you are preparing your answers in your notes, I always say to do it in bullet form and don't have full sentences written out. Have it in bullets so that you know what your core ideas are. And that will help you to memorize your bullets or your core ideas and not stumble over your words as much. In addition to that, it's just practice, right? It's just getting comfortable and practicing. And one thing I will share with you, and I know this being an interviewer, is we want you to do well, right? Like we are your cheerleaders. You go into that interview with me, and I want you to do well. The worst thing is me needing to write an interview report where someone did not do well. That is not a fun day for me. So trust me, whenever you go into an interview, we want you to do well. We genuinely want to get to know you. Anybody that is interviewing you has signed up to do this. Like this is a volunteer position that I do, that I've been trained, that I put in time to do. So we are rooting for you. We want you to do well. So keep that in mind when you walk into the interview, right? This is just another normal human. We just want you to do well. Hopefully that can help with your confidence level. And then I suppose one other piece of advice on just practicing and prepping for the interview is have something that you can talk about in terms of creating some fun small talk or some sort of connection at the beginning of the interview. I think sometimes a lot of folks will just go into the interview and say, "Hi, Melanie, it's nice to meet you. Hi, Tanya, how are you? I'm good. How are you?" And it just doesn't really allow us a moment to connect. So I would highly recommend having something to talk about, whether it's a vacation you recently took or a trip you're planning or something fun you did over the weekend. Have something to talk about and then shift it back to your interviewer and ask them about their next trip or their weekend. So, for example, maybe you would say to me, "Well, Melanie, I just had the best weekend. I went to go see Cirque du Soleil and I'd never seen it and it was really exciting. Have you ever seen it? Or what was the last performance you saw in person?" That allows for you to break out of kind of that normal small talk and to actually have some connection at the beginning of the interview. That can help the interviewer to feel more comfortable as well as yourself to be more confident so that you don't stumble over those words. So great question. And again, just practice. Practice makes perfect. Let's see. And you're welcome, Tanya. So we do have a little bit of time for other questions. If anybody has some, you're welcome to either ask them over the chat or to come off of mute, whatever works for you.
Hi, Melanie.
Yes.
Um, so it's Rifat here.
Oh, hi,
Um,
Rifat. How are you?
hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good.
So, thank you so much for the presentation. This was really helpful. And a question I have is, so like how you mentioned there were themes with the CBS interview process. How
Mhm.
would one be able to like find questions that would like fit those themes and like practice off of that?
Got it. That's a great question. We can talk about that now. So if we scroll back, with some of these, I included questions, but with others, I did not. So I think that's actually a great point. So let's talk through that together. So for theme one, why an MBA at CBS? Pretty straightforward in terms of the questions you're going to get. The question could be, why CBS? Why do you want an MBA? What makes Columbia Business School special? Why did you apply to Columbia? What interests you about Columbia? Et cetera, et cetera. So those are very straightforward. So any question you get about why do you want an MBA or why do you want to go to Columbia, they're basically asking, why do you want a CBS MBA? And I would really honestly use that advice for any top school you're applying to. Any school you're applying to, if they're like, why do you want an MBA? Tell them why you want their MBA, that school's MBA. Just immediately launch into why their school is the right fit for you. And certainly for Columbia or any other school you're applying to, if that school is your top choice, tell them, right? Don't be shy. If it is your top choice, say it, right? You could say, oh, well, I would like an MBA from Columbia. It's my first choice school. And here's a bunch of reasons why I think it's the best fit for me. So, pretty straightforward here in terms of the question you're going to be asked. Now,
Thank
in
you.
terms of, oh,
Oh,
you're very welcome. Yeah, and I'm,
yeah.
I'm going to go through each theme because I think it's a great question. With theme two, professional promise, there's a little bit more flexibility here in terms of the types of questions you might get that is meant to understand your professional promise. So it could be literal questions about your goals, such as what do you want to do for your summer internship? Or if you're a January entry candidate, it might be why do you want the January entry versus August? Why is it okay not to have an internship? What is your immediate post MBA goal, 3 to 5 year goal, or midterm goal? What is your long term dream job? So you might get very specific questions about these milestones or your specific goals. Be really careful about answering the question as detailed as possible. So don't just say, short term, I want to go into marketing. What the heck does that mean? Right? Or I want to do marketing for tech. That's really vague. So be as specific as you can. Job titles, if relevant, the function, the industry, the type of company or sub industry, maybe even a target company that you'd want to work for. So just be specific, right? Again, specificity is your friend in these interviews. It's going to allow your story to come alive and make you memorable and make you sound like you know what you're talking about. So that's how you'll handle the goals questions here with professional promise. Then they may ask you, well, why do you want to do X before your midterm goal of Y? Or how does your short term goal help you reach your long term goal? They may be asking questions like that, where they say, hey, I'm trying to understand your thought process. So don't be shy about sharing your thought process or your reasoning behind every single role that you want to have and how that roadmap makes sense to you. So that is a way I would answer those questions for professional promise. And then lastly, the questions I included here on this page are the plan B questions, which tend to throw people off. So if they ask about your plan B, it could be, what's your plan B if you don't get the first job you want out of business school? What's your plan B if you don't get into Columbia, etc. So those cover the types of questions you might get to cover your professional promise. Now, for theme three, teamwork, I do have laid out here a bunch of different behavioral questions you might have. So, pretty straightforward in terms of just understanding teamwork, your inclusivity, your leadership style. Basically, I would have a good 5 stories ready to go for these behavioral questions. And just know it's going to be questions about teamwork, inclusivity, DEI, and or leadership. And as I mentioned earlier, they may look at your resume and say, oh, here's an interesting bullet about teamwork. Can you tell me about this? Or tell me about this time that you worked on this team. How did it go? Tell me more about it. So, pretty straightforward in terms of behavioral questions. Just make sure you have those stories ready to go before the interview so you're not thinking on the spot. And then lastly, questions for contribution and engagement. So for this one, there's kind of 2 different ways I would think about it. In the first bucket, it could be asking about prior and current contributions and engagement in your community. So this would be how you've engaged when you were in undergrad, as well as post undergrad through your current life. So that would be tell me about what's your most important contribution to your community, or tell me about what you do outside of work, or tell me how you like to spend your time, or how do you like to be involved with others, or how do you engage with your community. Those are all the types of questions you might hear. So again, make sure you have at least one or two examples for college as well as post undergrad. And then the second bucket would be asking questions about the contribution you will make in the future at Columbia. So this would be asking about, oh, well, when you're at Columbia, how do you want to co-create your experience? Or how do you plan to contribute to the community? Or what do you plan to do at Columbia? Or how do you want to spend your time at Columbia outside of the classroom? Those are different ways that they may talk about it. So I think that covers some of the core questions that you might expect. I would say, Rafat, the last question that you might get from an interviewer is kind of the classic, is there anything you wanted to know from me, or do you have questions for me? And that's always one you just want to be prepared with at least two questions, depending upon how much time is left at the end of the interview. And for that, just make sure that you don't get too vague. Don't ask a silly question that you could know from just Googling a little bit about the school. If it's an alum like myself, a great question to ask is advice from me, right? Melanie, what do you wish you had known before you had started your MBA? Why did you pick Columbia Business School? What do you wish you had known? What was your favorite part about business school? Those types of questions are really smart to ask if it's an alum or a second year student. All right, thank you. Great question. All right, great questions, everybody. I think I'm just doing a time check. We've got about 7 minutes left. If anybody has any other questions, happy to chat about those now. All right, give you all a minute to think about it. And again, just pulling back up the discount that you're all welcome to use. All right. Well, I think that seems like it's everything for today. At this point, just want to thank all of you for, coming up today, checking in, listening to some of my thoughts that I had to share. And I really am just wishing all of you the best throughout this process. Hope to talk to some of you one-on-one at some point. And yeah, just please don't be a stranger. Reach out if you have questions about Columbia or the other top schools. And Amanda, just checking with you, anything else that you have to share from Leland's side? All right. Amanda says that's all. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. And I hope that you have just a great day ahead. Talk soon.